This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome in, folks, to another edition of Open Mic Night. I'm your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, I got to talk about this Michigan basketball team right now. As of now, 16-1, they look really, really legit and a force to be reckoned with in college basketball. We'll break that down for you. I know it's been a long time since I've talked about them. Also, a couple Tiger questions and one specific pitcher that I want to highlight who needs to have a big year this year if the Tigers want to do anything and really evaluate his future. Hopefully everybody had a great weekend and staying warm out there. I mean, you know, there's some times where it's getting really, really cold, and I know it's starting to warm up. At least here in Cleveland, it's starting to warm up a little bit. It's just windy. Every time I go outside, it just seems like I'm going to get blown away by the wind because of how windy it is. And then, you know, it's like in the mid-30s, upper 40s, and it's like, okay, like that's not bad. But when you get outside, it feels even colder because of the fact that the wind is really, you know, adding to that coldness. So definitely stay warm out there. But we are going to have some more days, hopefully soon in the next couple weeks, that it seems like it's a little bit warmer than that cold weather. So just starting to get back into spring. That's all we're hoping for. And eventually into March Madness. I plan on doing a lot for March Madness on the podcast once we get to that point. And because March Madness is one of my favorite times in all of sports, in all of the sporting year. It's so much fun to watch. And, you know, of course, we were snubbed from it last year as it was canceled. And but it should be exciting to watch yet again. And Michigan State, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to make it this year. I thought they may have a chance just based on strength of schedule. I mean, they have played a lot of really quality teams. And if they can make a push in the end, you know, if they can beat Illinois, if they can beat other teams, you know, that are, heck, a win against Michigan would be huge. And they have to make some noise in the Big Ten tournament in order to get back into that tournament conversation, in my opinion. But it's going to be a tough sledding for Michigan State if they want to do anything. It's just been such a disaster of a season. I mean, especially in this odd year, it's hard for some teams to stay focused. It is. And Michigan State just seems to be the product of that. It's just a lot of things going wrong right now, and not a typical Izzo team at all. I mean, I think they've made the tournament the last 22 years. It's just unbelievable how much consistency Michigan State has, and it just seems like it's all falling apart this year. But I do want to turn my attention to Michigan basketball. 16-1. I mean, I never thought I would be here at the end of February thinking that Michigan would be 6-1. And look, I'm a diehard Michigan State basketball fan, right? You know, as you guys know who listen, I went to high school with Cassius Winston. You know, and I followed every Michigan State basketball game that he played, and it was so much fun when we went to the Final Four. They beat Duke and Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, all those guys. Those were fun times. And I remember watching Michigan State as a kid, you know, and going to Final Fours and just thinking, wow, like I love this team. I love Coach Izzo, and I love Kalen Lucas and Goran Suton and Kalen Summers and all those people, all those players. Draymond Green, I remember from middle school. But I just never felt the same for Michigan basketball. I was cheering for them when they made it to the Final Four with Trey Burke and Mitch McGary. That was a special team with John Beilein and company, but I just never felt an emotional attachment like I did to Michigan State, I guess. But I look at their schedule, and I remember back in December, say, a lot of people were texting me and saying, oh, Michigan State, like, they got a big test against Michigan. And I'm like, okay, Michigan really? Okay, Michigan State at the time had beaten some good teams like Duke. I think they were scheduled to play Virginia, but it got canceled. There was a couple other teams, can't remember off the top of my head. But I looked at Michigan's schedule, and I said, okay, they beat Bowling Green, Oakland in overtime, who actually ended up getting the 3 seed in the Horizon League tournament. Ball State, Central Florida, the pride of Taco Fall, and Toledo. And I'm like, who have they played? They haven't played anybody. Oh, Penn State, Nebraska, Maryland. Then they blew out Northwestern, who was ranked at the time. Their only loss all season was to Minnesota on the road, 75-57. And I don't know, the last couple weeks, I mean, remember, they were off all that time. All those games got postponed. The Penn State game got postponed. Indiana was postponed. Northwestern, the Michigan State game, and against number 6 Illinois. All postponed. They were out for multiple weeks. And they come back on the road in Madison, Wisconsin, and defeat the number 21 team in the country, 67-59. They play Rutgers, and I know Rutgers is Rutgers, but Rutgers can be a sneaky team sometimes. Steve Packel is a very good coach. They won that gun, and then they went to Columbus and beat their rival Ohio State 92-87. I mean, there's some times when I look at this Michigan team and I think, wow, they can be elite. There's some magic to this team. They play Iowa, who's number 9 at the time of this recording on Thursday. So, I love this one website, and it's ncaa.org, and I use it for my John Carroll basketball games or football and all that, all the sports for Division III, because they have all the NCAA divisions, and you can see where your team ranks in all kinds of statistics in all kinds of divisions. So every time I want to see, which team is elite, this really helps me when I fill out my bracket, actually. There's a couple of key statistics that help me when I pick teams. So this is definitely a useful website for me. NCAA.org, and I wanted to look up Michigan. This is, okay, well, what are they ranking nationally? How are they? And some of these stats blow my mind. I'm not going to lie. Like, for example, field goal percentage defense. They're allowing opponents to shoot 38.5%. That's not only number 1 in the Big Ten, but that's number 4 in the entire country. Very, very good percentage on defense when allowing the opponents to score. That's key, especially for a big tournament run. Free throw percentage, another thing that is key when you're in close games. And I see it a lot here at John Carroll, especially, and I've seen it over time. You got to make free throws. You got to make your free throws at the key times in order to eke out those close games. 76.7%. That's number 2 in the Big Ten, number 30 in the nation. That's another big stat. I mean, rebounding margin, 8.2, number 14 in the country. Scoring margin, they're winning by just about 13 points a game. That's 20th. There's another key stat as well. 3-point field goal percentage. They're shooting lights out from deep, just under 39%. 16th in the country. And 3rd in the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten's loaded this year. I mean, there's a lot of really, really nice stats that Michigan has. And I know it's just numbers and all that, but some of these stats really help tell the story, at least in my eyes. And Michigan has some elite stats. Can they get it done in tournament time? That's another question. But statistically, seems like they're getting it done so far. Iowa on Thursday, Indiana, Illinois, and then Michigan State back-to-back because they had to make up that last game because it was postponed. I mean, Michigan State is Michigan State. They can be tough at times, but this season, I don't know. There's just some games where they just have not had that fight. We'll see what happens. It's a rivalry game, so anything can happen. And we'll have to see what Michigan State's really made of the next couple games. They'll play Illinois and Iowa and a couple other teams. It'll be interesting to see. They're coming off a big win over Indiana. And then March 10th through 14th is the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis. Speaking of Indiana, that's where the tournament's actually going to be, the national tournament. They're going to have that all throughout the state of Indiana at different field houses. I think Hinkle Fieldhouse is a location, or wherever Purdue plays is one. Lucas Oil Stadium will be one. All going to be throughout, basically, it's seemingly the basketball capital of the United States, Indiana. That should be interesting to watch, especially at some of those venues. But Michigan, I mean, they have guys, too. I mean, obviously Hunter Dickinson and Isaiah Livers, he stepped up. Xavier Simpson being gone, John Teskey, there were some question marks. Who's going to be stepping up for this team? And they've got a lot of great additions. And I mean, one guy I really have to mention, though, is Juwan Howard, the head coach. And I had my doubts about him. I did. And to be quite frank, I still have doubts. Sure, Michigan's 16-1. Sure, they're one of the best teams in the country. That's great. That's awesome. I'm really happy for Juwan Howard. I have nothing against Juwan Howard. I have nothing. He was a very classy player. He represented Michigan very well. I really like his story. His grandma passing away the day that he signed with Michigan, and the whole Fab Five story was really encapsulating. And you could just tell, like, he was very mild mannered, and he was really a great leader. You could just sense that. But I had my doubts. I thought, can he really lead this team, to the promised land? to being a very successful, he had never coached as a head coach ever. He had all that NBA experience as a player, and then he coached with the Heat for a little bit, but never at the college level. And right now, it seems like he's getting the right guys in, and, he's trying to build a culture, a really, really good culture. And, I know he's really active in the community over there. My buddy who goes to Michigan says he hands out donuts on the campus quad a lot, so he's visible. Look, he's trying to build that culture and that rapport with the students and the faculty and everybody associated with Michigan that, this is winning culture, and we want everybody to be a part of it. I have nothing wrong with that. I just question, let's see how he plays under pressure in the big games in the tournament, because as we all know, in the tournament, anything can happen. So great start for Juwan Howard. I just have a little bit of doubts right now. And, Izzo is a seasoned coach. This season, it just has not gone as planned, but we'll have to see. I think Michigan, and I mentioned those statistics earlier, Michigan has everything it can take to make a little bit of a run. We've got to finish out the season. We'll definitely be visiting them more throughout, and I want to do a lot leading up to March Madness because it's an awesome time of the year. So it'll be interesting to see how they play in these next 5 games: Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, and then 2 games, a home and home against Michigan State. Can't wait for that. By the way, I wanted to bring up a point really fast, and it has to do with watching games. Now, look, I'm still living in my house right by college, or right by campus, right here in Cleveland, and I don't have cable. I don't get cable. At my house back home, I get cable, so I get all access to all the ESPN, ESPN2, Fox Sports, NBC, all those for games. But now, since I have this online TV or a TV that plugs into Wi-Fi, I just don't have access to as many games, and then you have to pay for certain services, and I'm not going to pay to just watch a game, just one game. So it's been a little bit of a struggle, I'll admit, watching some of these games, but I do my best. I'm reading up a lot, and I'm watching a lot of highlights and everything, but I don't know if anybody else has that problem where, the online TV and you're not paying for a service, how hard it is to, get access to some of these games. Just a train of thought. I think I have to toy with it a little bit more, but my schedule gets really, really busy at times, and I have to toy with it a little more, but I may have access to Fox Sports Detroit on there. I'll have to see. It's a whole another world to me with some of this technology stuff with watching games and all that. But definitely, I definitely love staying in the loop because I think college basketball is way better than the NBA, and that's just my opinion. And I think the quality of play, just every possession matters, and that's what makes the tournament so awesome too. Is just how everybody is so in tune with each possession and the upsets alerts and all that. It's you don't see everybody just jacking threes up all the time like in the NBA with 20 seconds on the shot clock. No, this is very competitive basketball, and I love seeing that in college basketball. That's just why I love the college game a lot better. All right, so I do want to switch topics over to the Tigers, and we teased it a little bit last week how it's time. This is Tiger baseball, and it's time back in Lakeland. They've been in Lakeland in one location more than any for longer than any team has in the entire MLB, as Tiger Town, as people call it. Shout out to Bob Vergils, by the way, a longtime public address announcer for the Tigers. I know he loves being out in Lakeland, and he's called some PA for Lakeland Flying Tiger games, also some spring training games. We'll see. I'm not sure if he's doing it this year, but his voice is awesome. He's one of my PA idols, and he's really, really cool, good to listen to. And I know he was doing some stuff in Lakeland post-retirement once he retired from doing Tigers games and Michigan basketball games and all that. He's a very, very legendary voice, that's for sure. But there's one pitcher in particular for the Tigers this season that I'm very, very curious about, and somebody that really has to step up this year is Franklin Perez. Now, some people might be like, okay, who the heck is Franklin Perez? Let me explain. Franklin Perez was one of the players that was in the Astros trade with Justin Verlander back in 2017. Now, remember, the Tigers traded Justin Verlander for Jake Rogers, who's a catcher, more of a defensive catcher, doesn't really have that much of a bat. Daz Cameron, who did have a couple of appearances last season, kind of became an everyday starter towards the end back in 2020 in center field. I think they want him to play more center field. And then Franklin Perez, he was the other guy. It's interesting, too, because new manager A.J. Hinch, he would have overseen all that, the minor league system and all that, in Houston. Because remember, he was the manager in Houston when the trade was made. So I'm sure he knows a lot about these guys, which could play to an advantage. Maybe he knows how to use their strengths more to their advantage instead of just looking at their glaring weaknesses, like, for example, Jake Rogers being just a defensive catcher and not really having a bat. But anyways, Franklin Perez, he's been somewhat of a disappointment. He was like a top 10 prospect when the Tigers got him in the organization. He immediately got up to the top 10 ranks. His issue, though, over the last couple of years has been injuries. I mean, he has barely pitched in any minor league games. I think he's bounced around from club to club in the minor league system just because of injury. And it's just sad because, he has a lot of talent. But is it one of those things where the Tigers just got the bad end of the deal, and it's just a guy that who has a lot of potential but just could never live up to it because of injuries? I mean, he's going to be 24 this year. So it's time. It's time that he makes his major league debut, and this is a big year for him. This is going to prove if he can really stay healthy and all that. And so far, the reports of spring training camp say that he looks very healthy, and I just really need him to play well for the Tigers and add to that rotation of pitchers that's supposed to be one of the best in baseball in the next 5 years or so. Because if you look at it, Casey Mize, he's supposed to be the ace. He's supposed to be the guy of the future. He struggled last year, but a lot of rookie pitchers struggle. I'm not going to let last year bog down on him. There's Matt Manning, who also has not made his major league debut yet. They were kind of waiting on him. He was on that taxi squad for a little bit, but never actually got called up to the big leagues. I think it's time now. Matt Manning isn't a baby anymore. He's not a 16-year-old prospect from outside the United States or international free agent. He's not a kid that straight from high school who's 18 years old. No. Matt Manning, I think, will be 23 this year. No, it's time. He's got to come up and pitch. I was kind of mad that he didn't get called up last year. I don't know. Some of these questions, I think it was something with the service time, but still, they should have gotten him up. Last year should have been used as a year for a lot of the guys, more of the guys, in my opinion, than they had. More of like an experimental year to see, how they fit in the major league club. And Matt Manning was one of those guys that just got left behind. I know Alex Faedo is going to have Tommy John surgery. He was another prospect they thought could maybe be like a bullpen guy later on in his career. Tommy John, he's going to be out for a couple years or so. Then there's the guys, the old veterans. Actually, I forgot Tarek Skubal, another guy they're very, very high on, and he sort of struggled last year too. But look for a bounce back year two for sure. But then there's the old vets. There's Matt Boyd, who there was a lot of talk like, hey, trade him. A couple of years ago, there was a whole trade talk because we could get some decent value for him in prospects or whatever, but they didn't pull the plug. And then last year, he absolutely blew up. I think his ERA was well over 6. It was just a really odd year for Matt Boyd because he had been pitching very well in the last couple years. Something happened last year. I don't really know what it was, but it was he just had a real off year, and now his value's gone down. Then there's Daniel Norris, who seems like he can never stay healthy, who lives out of his van. I don't know if he still does, but I remember there's a big story about that. And then Jordan Zimmerman's gone. He was probably the last contract that I would say was a really, really big contract outside of Miguel Cabrera. We still have Miguel, of course, and he's probably going to be a Tiger for life for the next couple years. And, I don't know if he'll pull out his contract or leave or whatever, but that's a conversation for another story. Interesting, though, that Jordan Zimmerman signed with the Brewers, his hometown team. He's from the state of Wisconsin. Best of luck to him there, but he just did not do well in Detroit. I mean, he fizzled out. I mean, he could not seem to have an ERA below 5 a lot of times. It just, as soon as he made that switch from the NL to the AL, it just totally changed. The NL, he just had a lot more success with the Nationals than he did in the AL with that extra designated hitter. But back to Franklin Perez. for a little bit. So he had a lat strain, a shoulder inflammation. He had some shoulder tendonitis as well. He was the number one prospect in the Tigers organization in 2017 when they made the trade. So he was number one. But since the injuries have caught up to him, number 14 he slid to last year, 2020. Daz Cameron's number 7. Jake Rogers is number 12 in the current organization. So those are the players that they've gotten for Justin Verlander. So, and Verlander, I believe, is 38 now. Wow. Jeez. It seems like yesterday that he was winning the Cy Youngs for the Tigers. But now there's reports that he looks very healthy out in training camp and he's throwing the ball well and all that. But interesting about Perez, though, last summer in summer camp, so this was July. Remember, the season was messed up where, they had like that taxi squad and they had some guys that were invited to, quote unquote, spring training, which was really just at the Tigers ball club or Comerica Park. And he was only throwing in the low 90s with his fastball. And in the MLB, that's like an average fastball to maybe even nowadays a little bit below average. Like, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it. If this is going to be one of those other prospects that just fizzles out and we got the bad end of the deal, I mean, how many times have we heard that in Detroit sports for anything? I mean, that's gonna make me upset, and I'm sure that's gonna make a lot of Tiger fans upset. So I really, really hope that all these reports are true, that he's really throwing the ball well, that he's getting his fastball speed up, and he can contribute. The Tigers need him. Tigers need him to succeed in order to get all this elite pitching staff that they so-called have up and throwing and making sure that they're getting strikeouts and, getting people out. In 2019, that was the last time he pitched because there was no minor league season in 2020. He had 2 starts, had a 2.35 ERA for High A Lakeland. So that's the Flying Tigers that play at Joker Marchant Stadium down where the Tigers train. 6 strikeouts, 5 walks. In his entire career, he's had 234 strikeouts with just above a 3.5 ERA in 45 starts. And a lot of that, to be honest, was when he was with Houston, with the Astros organization, because it just has not really materialized as a Tiger because of the injuries. It's going to be interesting, too, to see if they're going to use him as a reliever or as a starter. I mean, obviously he has a lot of starting experience, and if you're the number one prospect in the organization, you're going to be a starter. And that's what he was brought in. That's what he was traded for. He was traded to be one of those guys. But at this point, I don't know. I don't know. There's question marks, and Hinch would know better than a lot of people because he dealt with these prospects. I just really want to know, and I'm curious to see what A.J. Hinch is going to do. If he's going to put him in that bullpen, or, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he starts out in the bullpen with the Tigers. Maybe just give him a couple innings, here and there, and then when it's time, when they feel he's ready, then give him some starts. But I really hope he's up this year. Like I said, this year's going to be a big year for him. That's for sure. There's some other storylines just really fast. We'll dive deeper into some of these later on, but it looks like Jeimer Candelario will stick to third base. That's interesting because Isaac Paredes they brought up last year to play third base. Candelario moved over to first base when C.J. Cron got hurt. And, a lot of people thought Isaac Paredes could be that guy that starts at third base for a long time, in the Tigers organization, with being a high-profile prospect and all that. But it seems like Candelario's been moving back during workouts. So we'll see. We'll monitor that story for you. As well. And then, of course, there's the yearly story of Miguel Cabrera. Oh, he's back. He's healthy. He's ready to go. And there's all this hype. The hype's been going on for probably at least the past 6 years. He's back. He's in shape every single year. And then it's like he just said that the power's gone. He hit 280, I think, which is decent, but, not that Miguel, that 320 hitter with 40 home runs, like not that Miggy anymore. Instead of hitting home runs, he's hitting, like deep doubles or, some long singles. It's the power just not there anymore. But it's going to be interesting to see, actually, because, I mean, one of these years you think it might bite. Maybe it will be true. Maybe he actually will have a big comeback season because that's always my curiosity, and I'm sure that's a lot of Tiger fans' curiosity too. But it'll be interesting to see, and I want to monitor these stories, and we'll get some more updates for you later on. Hopefully, we'll have some guests as well, some March Madness tournament guests. I want to see if I can get a couple ex-players, ex-coaches on for some of these teams. I think that would be a really, really interesting podcast, and guys with tournament experience, if you will, and the big dance is a lot of fun, and then Tiger spring training. It just really reminds me of that warm weather we're going to be having and getting out of this cold. Sick of this cold right now. Got to get to spring and summer where I can play some golf again, but just not windy and not raining or snowing, because we've gotten snow in April before. So the weather has to cooperate, especially for early part of baseball season. But folks, thank you so much again for tuning into this week's edition of Open Mic Night. Make sure to check out all the other content. There's a gambling podcast out that John and Phil do. There's the wrestling podcast, of course, Doc and Jock. The Michigan podcast, they do a great job with a lot of great interviews. Really, really interesting, that podcast is, with Steve Dace. And also the Fan Report, all great podcasts on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Really, really happy now. This is my 8th month with the network, and I've loved every single month, and I love doing this podcast and doing interviews, and amidst all my busyness and all my broadcasting schedule, really, really appreciate all the support and all the listenership and all that. So thanks again, folks, for tuning in, and make sure to join us next week only on Open Mic Night.